BI zet, ik breng het je die welbekende zachte geef. Leven als bodypain, op mijn lijf geschreven. Leef ik hier, vlieren fluiten in het diepe zuiden. Geen voorraadkasten van 2000 als je liedjes luistert. Achterliggende boodschappen die heb ik niet dus. Leun terug en luister vlug je Limburgeringscursus. I swing it from the south, holding it down. That's how we do it in the south.
Welcome to the second part of our special on Detroit and the Rustbelt. I left you with the question, how big is the need for Limburg to reinvent itself? We think there is a need, with massive cuts in government budgets, an economic crisis, demographic change and the young but still relatively small creative industries. For reinvention we need ideas, and those ideas we found in the Renaissance of Detroit. I'm here on Belle Isle, where you have a great view of the Detroit skyline. Of course, with its centerpiece, the GM Renaissance Center, which was built in the 80s as a beacon of hope in times of economic downfall in a crumbling city. But the Renaissance of Detroit has started just now. The Renaissance of Detroit starts small, on the root level. This is central to the work of Bethany Batzler, who works for the DC3 and helps entrepreneurs with microfunding, among other means.
Before coming to Detroit, I lived in Chicago and I lived in LA and I lived in London, and while those are all amazing cities, there was sort of this shared phenomenon where everything was becoming the same. Mm-hmm. So you couldn't go to hardly any coffee shops that were just unique to that neighborhood because they were being replaced by Costa Coffee or Starbucks, of course. Yeah. So I saw Detroit as a place where you could have a really authentic experience, and what I saw being my opportunity to help Detroit was in helping those small, independent, mom and pop style businesses kind of grow and thrive. And my perspective is if you're coming here with good intentions and you want to provide a unique and positive experience, then you're doing something that's in the realm of social entrepreneurship.
From social entrepreneurship to a social brand. Philip Laurie is a director of Detroit Lives, a so-called social brand.
Well, I think probably one of the more fascinating parts of Detroit is the way that we're understanding the real value of community. And that transfers over into a small business environment, but really community in and of itself, and the importance of having the human relationships with your neighbors and the people around you and how important that is. I think that in a lot of ways American development has shifted away from that, where you know, the emphasis is less on the people and more on everything that goes around that. You know? And so I think that because in a lot of ways the exterior and the aesthetics of the city are damaged, you know, we kind of wear our problems on our sleeve, it forces people to confront those issues.
Do we in Limburg confront our issues? Or are they tucked away and slumbering underneath well-paved streets and social infrastructure? Community is a key term in entrepreneurship and leadership. As Sarah Serpicki from the Great Lakes Urban Exchange Conference points out again.
It bums me out though. You know, I do wish that the governments were working better and were more proactive and did everything they could to support the community efforts. What I get sort of the most excited about are initiatives that are really driven by neighborhood needs. You know, I think there are some new models of engaging people in that and trying to get them to encourage them to imagine different possibilities.
Let's go back to the conversation I had with Matt Clayson, director of the DC3. I asked him how he sees the situation in Europe and which strategies both the US and Europe should embrace.
I think we're going to fail a lot before we find that right solution that will fix. But I think that's what we as a city and as a society need to embrace is failure. But failure in that we learn from our mistakes.
I think it's really just taking those hardened minds in Detroit that have lived through years and years of decline, that have sort of lost faith, and it's just kind of flipping that switch that says a new day is possible. I think, in my opinion, that's the beginning of larger scale systemic change, because where change begins and ends is very hard to say. So we must start somewhere, and sort of showing people that very beginning, that very first part of hope. That's massively powerful. I think that, and then when you stretch that out over a long term, you start to see actions that mirror that belief. But it has to start with something, and for me, that's just making people see that a better future can be out there.
Enriched by the ideas and experiences of the interesting people we met during our travels, we flew home. But now it was time to translate the ideas to Limburg. We are back in Limburg, left with all the impressions and ideas from Detroit. But the important step is how to translate them to Limburg. And that's why I'm here with Maurice. We're going to look back. Maurice, what is the impression that really stuck with you in Detroit?
Well, in many cases, Detroit was the extreme of certain developments that we have in Limburg. A lot of people said, for example, reinvention is the only option. I believe that for the case of Detroit. However, in Limburg, I think we have a lot of good qualities that we can build upon. But still, developments like demographic decline challenges those qualities. So we need to reinvent certain ways of thinking. And I think there is a role for the creative industries in that, because also in Detroit, the change that is going on in the city of Detroit is driven for a large part by the creative industries.
Maurice, how can we translate those observations to actions in Limburg?
Well, I would say three things. First of all, there is still a strong connection between the leftover of the car industry and the design academy and the design community. And I think there is a lot of things we can gain in that field in Limburg. Not only between the design community and the leftovers of the industrial era, but also with companies of the post-industrial era, like for example CBS and the big pension funds we have in Heerlen. So that's one thing. I think secondly, we need to build on the infrastructure. Creative industry is still a lot of entrepreneurs who are very small, and they need to be connected between each other. But we also need to build connections between the creative industry and different sectors, and also build connections across the borders. We are situated here in an area with a lot of foreign borders, so we need to make connections with what is happening in Flanders, in Aachen, in Wallonie, but also the Venlo border area. In order to do that, we saw in Detroit the DC3 institution, and I think Limburg also needs an institution for the creative industry who advocates the interests of the creative industry and who builds this infrastructure, etc.
Of course, there's one thing we miss from Detroit, and those are the great burgers. So meeting up in a burger restaurant with Marcel and Joost really makes sense. Marcel, what is your most important observation in Detroit?
One thing they all said was that they were working within the community, and the situation in Detroit showed me that the future lies within the community, and that we have to, in a way, trust that people will always try to improve their own situation.
Joost, what is your main observation, the most important observation you did in Detroit?
My main observation is that for me it's the economy stupid. That's phrase of Clinton, I think. That economical factors are driving city development in Detroit, and that for our region we must already prepare for things to come, maybe in 10 years or 15 years or 20 years time. And I'm seeing a renaissance of really making stuff with your hands and going back to this tradition of manufacturing.
Could we implement those things in Limburg?
I think that it's readily implementable in Limburg, to not only having a society of services, but providing real products for real people.
And is there a role for creative industry specifically there?
if a product is not well designed or doesn't meet expectations or isn't easy to use, nobody will buy it. So there's certainly a great role for the creative industries.
Joost, looking back on this trip, what would be your final statement?
Yeah, my final statement. The market is certainly not going to make it as a driving force. That's without question. And it's enormously hopeful to see these people who are in a dysfunctional city with no state anymore, how they are reorganizing themselves to set up new initiatives, and it really gives a sense of hope. And I think if we here in Limburg, Netherlands, or even in Europe all work together, and there's real cooperation, then we are going to make it. Nothing is going to stop us.
Okay, so it's mainly up to you. Thank you for watching this special on Detroit, and maybe see you next time. Bye.